first presentation will be done by Pedro, and he will tell us everything about Pentaho 8.0. Okay?
Everything about 8.0 is probably overselling it. I'm not sure I even looked at the presentation before, so I'll see how it goes. So 8.0, it will be released on November 15. You probably saw already the announcements. Don't ask me why we announced before releasing it. Apparently, some people think it makes sense. I don't, but that's fine. But next week it will be available for download. So whatever. This is the goal that we've been trying to get to at Pentaho. This is something that it's a slide that if you've been around, you've probably been seeing this for the last 2 or 3 years, which is a good thing. It means that we still believe that the direction that we're headed makes sense, and we believe that in order to make a difference on this area that's, as you all know, extremely populated, where we add value is by making sure that we have something that goes from the source of the data all the way to delivering data to the users. And we believe that this doesn't mean that there should be a silo in between these different areas. You see a lot of, in the market, a big division between the data integration tools, the data prep, which kind of started really high, and then today you hardly hear anything about it, and the business analytics side. We think that that funnel, that hard distinction doesn't make a lot of sense. And we are trying to look at it from a different angle. For instance, we believe that analytics should be available at any point of the cycle. And we're trying to achieve that goal by keeping this high-level strategy in mind. What we can do now, especially now that we're part of the larger Hitachi group, is that we want to go even earlier to the source of the data. So far, we started at the ETL layer by connecting to data sources, user sentiment feeds, databases, files. We want to reach to the sensors themselves, to the things. This is why it's very natural for us to start talking about IoT, is because we can go earlier in the cycle. There are tons of challenges related to that, mostly data transmission, data security, and auditing, in order to get data from the sensors into the funnel that we normally know. But this is what we can do by being part of a group that actually manufactures those things. This can see really bad. Can you, Stefan, can you just help me put that a little bit? So, there are 3 areas that we are trying to focus on right now. Maybe just get that thing closer.
This was not a good idea. The problem is 16 to 9, the format. So
let's solve this the Portuguese way. Done. Thank you. So there's 3 challenges that we were trying to keep in mind as we worked on this release. The first one was make sure that we handle data volume in a more scalable way. The second has to do with the format where that data is stored. The third is making sure that we simplify this process throughout the stack. So we have improved, and I'm sorry. And I'll go through this, but basically, we improved the connectivity to Kafka and any streaming data sources, made it available with Spark, and added support for Knox. On the second one, improvements on AEL, Avron Parquet, and a really important directional concept that we just started, that's the worker nodes, and more improvements on Data Explorer, repository UX, Operation Smart. So this is at a glance. If you have no idea what this means, that's why bullet points are a specifically stupid way to convey data. So going into the details of the different releases. I've split it into a slightly different way in here. In terms of platform and scalability, we have the worker nodes and a new theme being introduced. So, brilliant. Worker nodes is a concept that we've been trying to introduce for a while, and we finally had the opportunity to bring to life in 8.0. And this is something where we really leveraged the Hitachi Vantara resources, because we were able to, instead of building everything from scratch, we were able to leverage an internal project that we called Foundry, that allowed us to implement this in a way that we could not do if we were on our own. I will not go into detail into worker nodes because Jens will cover this after, but very quickly, the goal of worker nodes is to remove a complexity that we've always had to do manually in PDI and in data integration. So we know that PDI is blazing fast, but it gets to a point where there's only so much you can do with one single server. If you have like 1,000 transformations that you want to run part of a nightly job, as fast as it is, there's like a physical limit for what can be done. Historically, and since the beginning, we had some scalable abilities within PDI. We could have cart clusters, we could define what gets executed where, but one of the biggest problems with that approach is that you manually had to control what happens where. For instance, you had to declare in advance the number of nodes that you had available. And something that it was a specific pain point, if one of those nodes went down, you would risk losing your ETL process. And you had to control that process manually. The concept of worker nodes that actually reaches out for more than just ETL is actually a very, very simple concept. The only thing that what this thing does is, when you want to execute something, and obviously we started with jobs and transformations because these are the majority of the use cases, instead of just saying execute locally, what we say is execute this somewhere. And through the work that was done with worker nodes, in a dynamic way, instead of executing locally, it will delegate the execution for one of the nodes, one of these worker nodes, that will just make things work. So the work will be delegated to something that will execute this, and then instead of just having it locally. This is a concept that we started with jobs and transformations, but something that we'll want to do for any kind of content, from reports for bursting being scheduled up to even later, who knows, the execution of queries, so that you have your front-end server available for user interaction and the hard work being done. And all of this in a dynamic way, so you can just add more nodes to do the nightly process, shut them down, and everything will keep working gracefully, hopefully. Jens will talk about this. Basically, we're leveraging, by using that Foundry infrastructure, we're leveraging technologies like Mesos, Kubernetes, Docker containers, and everything. We did the work so that the complexity was taken out of the user. When we're developing integrations and ETLs, we should be focused on the business logic. We should not have to worry about what gets executed where or what happens in terms of that scalability. So the other one is cosmetic, and the reason for this is not because we particularly like red, but to try to bring us more closely to the Hitachi brand. The old themes are still available. Themes, you can just create whatever you want. But now if you do a default installation, you'll get a more red-based theme. On a migration, you still get the old one. Anyone can choose, but these are kind of cosmetic improvements. Nothing special about this one. These were the highlights that's high-level as the platform and scalability. Now, for the data integration part, there are 4 items that I think are really relevant in here. Streaming support. This one is, I think, really, really powerful and something that we'll leverage much more. Run configurations, more capabilities on the Data Explorer side of things, and new open save experience. I cannot read this laptop from that distance. So, streaming. We now have a much, much better support for streaming data sources. As some of you know, there's already a lot of streaming data sources today in the product. There are a few, JMS, and some of those things. And there are on the marketplace some connectors to Kafka, MQTT, things like that. But there is one problem when we just use the classic approach for handling streaming data sources, is that Kettle on its genesis is a micro-batching kind of engine. And Matt, can you leave the room for 5 minutes? And one of the problems that we have when dealing with these streaming data sources inside the transformation is that it requires, by definition, that the transformation is all permanently running in order to consume from the data sources. And by having this in PDI, there's a lot of issues that we have. For instance, one of the most typical ones that we find has to do with error handling and error processing on streams. We're reading from a message queue stream or from a Kafka queue. We get the message out, and in the old approach, what happens is that we acknowledge immediately that we have consumed the message. If something happened during the processing of the message, we would get an error, but we would have no way to basically be able to reprocess that. And that could cause some issues around data loss if something bad appeared in that flow. There are obviously ways to go around that, but once again, it's not ideal that we have to worry about those things. So what we did here was a different approach for handling streaming data sources. And we did this. The first, what you have today is Kafka, but we're going to be releasing more streaming data sources, and especially for the community and for 8.1, because we ran out of time, we couldn't do it for 8.0. We're going to deliver a set of well-defined instructions on how anyone could easily add more streaming data sources and contribute this way. So what happens in here is that we have, instead of just using the normal consume data from Kafka and just get the processing going from that point on, we use an approach that's similar to sub-transformations. We can think about it this way. But on every streaming step, we define how we are going to process the data that comes in. So if you open the Kafka consumer step, one of the things that we will see, and I think I actually have a screenshot in there. Nope, I have not. But one of the things that you are able to define, apart from the normal things that you would expect from Kafka, URL, port, which topics that you want to subscribe to, and what's the structure of the message. You link that to a subtransformation and you say, how often do you want to execute that? Either by number of records or by time-based. You can say, I want to launch the subtransformation every 10 seconds or every 1,000, 10,000 rows. We take that part, a subtransformation is executed with these get records from stream. We process that, and we have a much better way to control the flow. Error handling on this part becomes much easier. So what we do is that we only acknowledge to the source of the data that things went well after we finish that batch of processing. If something goes wrong, we have a better way to control what happens. So this new way of handling streaming data sources is something that we'll be seeing much more, especially because if you think in the concept of IoT, a sensor that's permanently giving data is something that we want to take care of. One of the things that this also implies, or one of the things that we had to take into account, and I will speak about that later, is support for AEL. AEL, for the ones that don't know what that is stands for Adaptive Execution Layer or something like that, where we allow to plug in different engines for these jobs and transformations to execute. So simply put, if we run this through AEL, instead of using the Kettle engine, we will use Spark to execute that transformation with no to minimal changes on the transformation logic. And one of the things that we did in here is that if you use this approach and run this thing in AEL, what you will get is that Spark, when this thing runs on Spark, it will use the Spark native Kafka way to handle data, so that you're reading the message and the RDD gets passed automatically through these things. So this will just work regardless if you're running locally, or it will be optimized for Spark executions if you're using AEL. And this is the part that we also improved, that has to do with the run configurations. We now have something that, this was done for worker nodes. This is exactly, I'm not sure if you can see it from the back, but when we execute a job or a transformation, we now can specify that if we want to execute it locally, or if we want to execute it on the server that we're connected to. A lot of times, we're working with PDI. We're connected to a server that's installed somewhere. Every time we test our transformation, it runs locally, but the ultimate goal is to run that transformation on a server. We usually need to either migrate, manually copy the transformations, or do something funky like schedule an execution to run now. Right now we can just select and that transformation will run remotely. This is a huge time saver, and I think a feature that we've been needing for a long time. The advantage of this is that by using this as part of a job orchestration, this is how we will decide when we need to scale things for worker nodes. There are jobs that run in sequence where we say that, okay, I would really like to scale these transformations and run these things in a distinct place. There are others where we know that, no, these make because we use temporary files or because it's these specific points we don't need to scale. We can specify if we want to run in the same environment or if we want to allow those bits to scale. So this is where this ties with worker nodes part, and once again, Jens should be talking about this in bigger detail. There's more improvements on the Data Explorer side of things in PDI. The Data Explorer is a concept that we introduced in 7.0, where you can get analysis, visual analysis within PDI at any point of the flow. No materialization, no tables output, no need to stage, just click there and explore data in a lot of formats. And we are increasing the capabilities of this tool for data exploration. In 8.0, we started to put the first set of filter capabilities, so you can have more ways to explore the data in there. This is something that we get a lot of questions about, which is, oh, why don't we see more improvements in Analyzer, in PIR, in Dashboard Designer? Why aren't you doing anything on the business analytics side? The answer to that is that we are. And this is where we're doing those improvements. The fundamental problem with Analyzer, PIR, even C tools to some extent, is that they are visual clients that expose the capabilities of a certain engine. Analyzer is a roll-up viewer, which is a front-end to Mondrian. PIR is a front-end to Pentaho metadata engine. Then we have a set of separate tools. And the way they work, as you know, are very distinct. The only way for us to fix this problem is if we take one step back and stop exposing to the user this distinction of engines. And this is what we are doing here. The plan, once we started to deliver the ET, is not because we think that God's gift to ETL is a visual experience within PDI. We think it's really, really useful and a huge time saver in terms of making sure that our ETL is correct. But we are doing this in a way, and even the way that we're building it, this is an OSGI plugin that leverages some of the capabilities that were introduced previously. We are making this in a way so that as soon as we are ready, and by ready, there's a lot of things that will define what ready means. It has to be feature compatible. We will need to evaluate as we go along. But the goal is, once we are ready, we just take this feature out of PDI and make it available on the server, so that we have one single and unified way to play with the data, regardless of where it is. So this is the plan, and this is what we're working towards on the business analytics side. So just grab me later if you want to know more about these things. And once again, after we are always trying to pay a little bit more attention to the usability aspects. One of the things that we've been doing lately is improve the experience around connecting PDI to the Pentaho server. A couple of releases back, we improved the performance a lot. Before, I believe 7.1 or 7.0, just exploring the default repository and opening it, you waited like 1 minute. In 7.1, it was down to 1 second or something like that. It was still visually an awful experience. If you do the same right now, we'll have a much more modern interface. It's the kind of things that do make a difference at the end of the day, and we're working to trying to make sure that we consolidate that. On the big data categories, improvements on AL, big data file formats. I need my glasses. Big data security, support for Knox, and VFS improvements on Hadoop cluster. So we released AL in 7.0, and we've been kept improving on that concept. Like I said previously, AL abstracts the engine where where the ETL runs on. It's a concept that it's pluggable in nature. So now we have support for Spark. One of the things that we are considering as we add more cloud vendors capabilities is, for instance, add support for Dataproc for Google, that is basically Beam. So it's something where we can add more engines as we go along. Right now, like I said, we support the Pentaho, the Kettle engine, and Spark. And there were a lot of technical improvements on this. A lot in terms of security, and despite the technical details that are actually irrelevant for now, one of the things that we were able to achieve in 7.1 is that, sorry, in 8.0, was in terms of performance, the team did a comparison between a transformation that was running in PDI through AEL on Spark and a native transformation on Spark. The difference was something natively, just using pure Spark code, it was something like 7 minutes, and with PDI and AEL, it was 8.5 minutes or something like that. A very, very small overhead that if you think that you don't actually have to write pure Spark code, I'll pay that price anytime. One of the things that comes immediately when we work with clusters is the format that they use to store data. We already had, once again, the community had already contributed plugins for Avro and Parquet. Now we added these native support for Avro and Parquet handling. We could not just bring the community plugins to the main product, especially because with the AEL concept, we also had to make sure that as we develop these steps, when this thing runs on Spark, we use the native Parquet and Avro implementations for Spark for optimization reasons. For 8.1, we're tackling Orc as well, and I think we'll get to pretty much the majority of the data formats that exist. Hortonworks uses Nox. This is something that it's actually hidden under a property because there's not a lot of customers using it on the field. I guess too bad for us, one of our biggest customers uses it, so we had to pretty much cover for that. But we have support for the Apache Nox project that's used for Hortonworks, and we can connect through Nox for the cluster. And also because this is something that the services guys in the field were asking a lot, we now have VFS support for managing files within the Hadoop clusters that we define. So we can just use, by using this VFS implementation, any step that supports VFS, we can use it to access the data within the clusters. These are things that are probably nothing flashy from a marketing release standpoint. For the guys that actually are implementing projects on a daily basis, this is really big. So just to finish this part, just some other... Yeah, I'm finishing, I'm done. Thanks for the warning sign. OpSmart, we extended support for OpSmart for Oracle, MySQL, and SQL Server. I hate OpSmart, so I'll skip this thing. Platform password security improvements. I won't even describe, this is so silly. So some audit forced us to do that. So now the user we increased the password security on the security implementations that we tell our customers to never use. Makes no sense at all. PDI was fully converted to Maven. So now it's much easier to just build the project, see what's happening, contribute to it, checking the latest stuff, fixing or contributing some new features. More news on the documentations, and always something that I love when we're able to do. We were able to deprecate some more components because we desperately need to simplify our stack and increase the collaboration between the different points. We removed the analyzer on MongoDB, which is like a Frankenstein project that's been around for a while. And we deprecated the mobile plugin, which oddly enough means that our product works much better in a mobile, because mobile plugin required an iOS version that doesn't even exist anymore. So by removing the mobile plugin, we have now much better support for mobile, which is kind of odd. I haven't read this slide yet. I'm sure it's important. And too many words, whatever. So that's it. Any questions? It's a great question. Why would I repeat the question? I don't know the answer. Yeah, there will be documentation. Yeah, the PDI PM will answer that. I'm sure, yes. Got that covered. Yes. I'm pretty sure that Sentry was already supported in 7.1. Yeah, Sentry is already done. No more questions? Then I'm done.